I have this unrealistic belief that I can do anything I want. And then when people tell me I can't do something, it's like more drive to go do that.
Welcome to Not a Minimum Viable podcast. I'm Rudy and I'm a builder and part-time entrepreneur who is quite involved in the Toronto tech space. And my co-host Manit is our resident finance expert with a deep understanding of markets and how capital flows through the industry. We're here to bring you conversations with the builders, founders, and entrepreneurs who are shipping way more than just MVPs in Toronto's tech ecosystem. Each episode will dive deep into their journeys, from those early minimum viable products to the full-scale solutions they're building today. Think of this show as a product that came after the MVP. Toronto needs more authentic conversations with people innovating, doing cool things, and trying out new stuff. No fluff, no overproduced content, just real talks with people doing interesting things in our city. So whether you're iterating on your own MVP, scaling your startup, or just curious about the builders shaping Toronto's tech future, you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're joined by Mitul, a photographer, design engineer, and a close friend of ours. Mitul, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a photographer. I used to do cityscapes and architecture. Now transitioned more into concert photography. And then in my spare time, I'm usually writing code, building random software. Usually it's personal. And in my daytime, I guess at my day job, I'm working as a design engineer at Vercel.
That's pretty cool. Thanks for being our first guest, Mitul. I know this is like our inaugural episode, and I imagine there's like some pressure you're feeling as well about, keeping it interesting and whatnot, but no pressure on you. This is all on us. We're just glad that you agreed to come out here and talk with us today. And, we're hoping that Rudy and my backgrounds and the mix that we bring to tech and business in that sense is kind of resonates with whoever ends up being our audience, and you being our first guest I think fits well with that ethos as well. So looking forward to a great conversation, guys.
Amazing, I'm excited.
From the time that I've gotten to know you personally, like outside of all this podcast stuff, I know that you're quite involved in the Toronto tech ecosystem. Do you want to maybe tell us about how you got involved in all those things from the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. It's a funny story. It goes all the way back to Futureland by Internet Vin, we all know. I was a big user on the app. I was posting on there daily, and then suddenly he's like, "Yo, who wants to go for a walk?" And I went on a walk with him because I was a big active user for the product. And then New Demos 1 happened back in, I guess it's almost been a year now. And after that, the city kind of just took a new life. A lot of people started hosting events. People started coming together, usually the same faces, and also a lot of new faces. And I also got to present at New Demos 1, which was a blast. So I met a lot of people through that. And then since then, just being involved, meeting a lot of new people, just hacking away, I guess. It's been great.
Wait, so I'm interested, just in case anybody listening to this is not familiar with the Toronto tech space, and I think my background kind of takes care of that as well. So before it gets too esoteric for anybody, so you mentioned Futureland, right?
Yes.
When did that come onto your purview? When does that start becoming a thing that you're like, oh, this is a cool thing that's happening in the city? Yeah. And I'm also curious about how, from your experience, when the Toronto tech space starts picking up, becoming more active.
For sure. Futureland, I guess it was probably in 2020, 2021 maybe that I found out about it. And I was just intrigued. I'm like, this is a weird app. It doesn't make sense. But for some reason, it clicked for me. And I'm glad it did. And then I guess the Toronto tech scene, in my perspective, can be two different things because I've always been in tech. So when I was in school, it was a completely different energy, different vibe. It was very divisive, whatever the right word is. And it just didn't feel authentic. After I graduated, COVID happened and kind of things just died down. There wasn't much events and I also wasn't involved in anything either. And then this is kind of weird because yes, New Demos 1 happened and then walk and talks and all that fun stuff happened. But actually, I left to travel for 4 months. But during that time, I know New Demos 2 happened, and that's what they say is one of the big kickoffs for a lot of events in the city. And what it branched out to is things that are not necessarily tech related, but adjacent, I would say. So we had Ben Perry, who started hosting lectures. We had people doing sorry, I can't remember the guy's name, but he does the nature walks.
Yeah, Mindful Miles.
Yes.
And all these, another one of those that happened in the summer as well.
Yeah. And all these things started from New Demos 2 and a bunch of the community on Twitter seeing all these events happening and wanting to bring people together. And especially I think it was really important after COVID, where we were all isolated and alone, that we really needed to shape life back into the city.
That's actually a pretty interesting angle that you point out there with like the pandemic. I think the timing for that and bringing a community into the tech space might have been like one of the big catalysts there.
Yeah.
I think without that, it might not have been as easy to see people like build together or
Yeah,
you know
for sure.
just like come together in a community.
Do you think that the fact that people were so isolated in the pandemic sort of contributed to the fact that once everything related to COVID died down, that the whole tech space sort of bounced forward, which might have been helped by new demos too, but do you think that it was bound to happen anyways because of how isolated we were before?
Good question. I do think there was a need for it. I think if you talk to anyone back in 2022 or something like that, they were like, yeah, I don't know where to find other people that work in tech who are eager to build things and come together for that reason. So I think it was absolutely necessary. It was going to happen regardless of who did it. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've like always been in tech since university, right?
Yes.
Like I know a little bit about the stuff you were up to before all the cool stuff happened, but I did hear from a mutual friend of ours that you were in the first batch of interns at Uber Canada.
No way, how'd you get that?
Yeah, Nardwar. But how was that experience like being the first batch of interns in Uber Canada?
Yeah. So it's funny, like I went to business school and I did part of my program, I got 5 internships. And I did all of them. I did 4 of them within banking because it was easy to get a job there, but I just didn't know how to break into anything else because I went to a non-target school, just like it's extremely difficult. And then I got Uber, and I was like one out of 1,000 and first one in Canada, which was great. And it was a completely different energy shift. People say that time at Uber Eats specifically, was probably one of the best teams and like best places to be because it was probably the smartest people I've ever met. And they all work together cohesively to make sure our company or Uber Eats scales very quickly. And my role was, damn, I really remember. My role was figuring out how do we launch 40 cities in one day, how do we get more riders specifically. And then my co-intern, my friend Sean, his role was to launch alcohol delivery in Vancouver. And as interns, that's a lot of opportunity and ownership you get over what you get to do at your job, which at the banks, you never really... You don't get that. It's just how the culture is there. And I think more importantly is that whatever you work on actually comes into fruition. So yes, today alcohol delivery exists in Vancouver because of Sean. And I don't know what I did. That was
That's pretty cool. How much would you credit your experience at Uber for the rest of your software development journey moving forward from that point onwards? Because you did pivot from business into software, right?
For sure. I think I'll add one nugget is that my first ever internship, it was pointless, like 100%. I was at CIBC. I automated my role within the first few weeks through learning VBA very quickly. And then I spent the rest of my time learning JavaScript. And that was a turning point. It's like, okay, this is what I enjoy doing. I like writing code in my free time. And that's what I'm going to do. And at Uber, I was specifically learning about SQL and the tech industry more specifically. And the plan was to actually go into product management. But as soon as I got to Uber, I promised myself I'm never going back to any banking. I'm not going back to banking or a role where it's not fulfilling in a way where I get ownership over what I want to do. And I stayed true to that. So as soon as I graduated, I actually joined a small startup called Soapbox. It was a product analyst role, but it was more like, okay, how do we help this company scale very quickly? And I got a lot of ownership over what I wanted to do.
So would you say that when you were looking for work opportunities at that point, your focus shifted towards how does the work make you feel? Like what kind of a situation is it putting you in, whether or not you can grow there, and it's not specifically about sticking to a particular job function, so to speak?
Yeah, that, I mean, I would say it was always there, but I guess there's this thing about you don't know what you don't know. So, like, yes, I worked at the banks and stuff like that, but, like, no one was there to tell me, hey, you can go work at these other companies. In fact, I didn't even realize I could be a software developer until, like, much later after university, even though I spent all my free time coding. Because I'm like, oh, I went to business school, no one's going to hire me as a developer. Like, it's impossible. I was very wrong. I was always inclined to make sure I do the right job, and then I guess that's fulfilling, but it was just, when you're very early in your career, you have to figure out how you're going to get that job. It was very difficult back then. And I guess I knew if I work at small startups, early stage companies, I will have a lot of ownership versus working at a big bank where all my peers went, and or consulting firms. It's just like, I'm not going to get to do what I really want to do. And I guess this can lead into the next part, which is COVID hit and I lost my job. And then I was actually unemployed for a whole year. And the feedback was pretty much the same. Like, look, you're a very smart kid. You're like very driven, da da da. But we're just gonna hire someone more senior for cheaper. And I'm like, this is pointless. Like, how am I supposed to get a job? I'm fresh out of school. And then after a year passed by, I'm like, you know what? What if I just start applying to engineering roles? And in 3 weeks, I had 3 offers. I'm like, this was a wasted a year of my life. I should just apply to engineering roles to begin with. And that completely changed the trajectory of everything.
And then was it just like generic software engineering, or was it design engineering?
It was always design engineering. I guess there's also another nugget. It's like when I was in university, Shopify was the only company that would hire developers as interns without any care about what school you went to or what degree you're in. And of course, they're Canadian, so it was always something I targeted. So I actually interviewed them 3 times for an intern. And this is a long story, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I would get to the final round and then get rejected, but I would ask them for feedback. And this is like 2015, 2016, so it's still not a massive company. So they would give me feedback exactly of what I need to work on. First time I got rejected, they're like, you need to learn HTML really well. So I became an expert at HTML. And the second time was like, you have to learn JavaScript really well. So I learned JavaScript really well. And then the third time was like, you need to learn React. I'm like, this is insane. Like, what the hell? But whatever. Since I wanted to work there so badly, I made sure that I became really, really good at those things. And that role that they were hiring for was specifically called UX developer. And that's essentially the same thing as a design engineer. And I think I've always known myself as like, I'm more creative than I am technical. So I kind of always, and I didn't want to learn, like, I didn't want to learn maths or whatever I need technical for software engineering. I just always wanted to make sure I was on the front end making things look pretty. And then, yeah, I guess all that stuff accumulated, snowballed, whatever the right word is, and then helps me become a design engineer.
That's pretty cool though. Like just the fact that you had that kind of clarity about knowing what the attraction to the work for you was specifically. I think that's pretty important for a lot of people, like at least straight out of university or some of their first jobs. But another thing that stood out to me when you said that when you were at the banks, there's nobody telling you that you should be taking ownership or you should be doing this or that. And I went on your website, because you have a website, and if anyone's interested, we'll link it when we post this. It's a pretty cool website. But what stood out to me was the first thing up there is like a link to a Casey Neistat video about like you're doing things that you can't do. Like, do you want to talk about that for a second? Because I'm interested how that like essentially resonates with you or what it means for you.
Yeah, I think my whole life I've just always, I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just innate, or it's just the male ego or something like that. It's just like I have this unrealistic belief that I can do anything I want. And then when people tell me I can't do something, it's like more drive to go do that. When I was younger, I used to rap. I performed at Yonge and Dundas Square, which is very impressive, in front of probably 1,000 people. And I think that speaks for some credibility. And then passing it on, the school I went to, I can't stress this more than anything. It's like I went to a non-target school, and the people around me were very risk averse. For them, me applying to these tech companies was like foreign. Like, why are you doing that? You're wasting your time. Just apply to a bank. You do one interview, you get the job. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And I want to make sure I create things that have long-term value or like actually come into fruition. So when all my peers around me were kind of like chasing the same thing, I was kind of like keen towards going a different path, mostly because of my interest and like mostly this belief that especially they put you into you when you're a student, like that you're going to change the world by working for a tech company, even if you're building generic B2B SaaS. Does that answer the question?
I think there's no right answer.
Yeah.
This is just about your experience and like how or why that particular, I guess, concept resonated with you. But and then again, you mentioned this like idea that if you work for tech companies and you can change the world and things like that. How much of that have you actually encountered in like the tech space with builders in particular? And how much of that do you think you actually need to believe in it? Like if you don't buy into the idea, does it pan out?
Good question. I think it depends on the companies you work at. I've been very fortunate to work at companies where everyone is passionate about what they're building and working on. Yeah, it's just like if everyone is working towards an important mission, especially on a small team, like, yeah, you're very aligned and it does help in terms of, crap, I don't know how to answer the question.
I'm just wondering, like, this idea of like, I'm going to change the world, like that attitude, how common is that with tech builders? Because we see it in like Silicon Valley things, and when you're watching interviews with people like Sam Altman, and they're at the forefront of such a big movement right now. and it's like they have this halo effect around them. But when you're starting small, when you're building something from the grassroots, like how important is that mindset of like, if I really want to do this, I can probably do something at this scale?
I think there's a certain level of delusion that's very important, and there's also a certain level of delusion that allows you to change the world. For like, I mean, we can use him as an example, but Elon Musk, he sold his first company. He could have walked away and called it quits, but no, he had to go build 15 more companies, and he's still not done. Now he's working for the American government. And again, that takes a certain level of delusion. And I think it's extremely common to find in tech companies in Silicon Valley, and because these are people under the belief that, hey, this, yes, sometimes generic B2B SaaS is going to help change the world or help change how people work. And it does, definitely. Like, obviously, Airbnb, even Coinbase have completely changed things for us. And there's companies like Asana who have probably not done anything, but I'm kidding. But that's the energy it attracts, and that's how it leads to multi-billion-dollar companies in a very short time frame. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I keep coming back to this idea of ownership that you've mentioned, and I can't help but notice how that's reflected in your photography as well. Because to me, from my perspective, it seems like when you're taking pictures of like the CN Tower, for example, you're taking this thing that's very public and common for everybody downtown, maybe like across the world, and you're capturing it in this, whatever the frames for an image are, that essentially grant you, in a way, ownership over this like one piece of thing that's shared by everybody else. And I think that's like neatly reflected in like your photography and all those things. I couldn't help but notice that you've achieved like really notable milestones in like your photography journey. You were once a personal photographer for Uber's CEO, and you've also had your work featured as wallpapers on Google devices. How did this happen? Like, all this is crazy stuff.
Yeah, photography is interesting because it's literally been 10 years now since my peak, I guess. Sorry, I don't want to say peak. Since I did it very consistently. So when I was in university, I would spend my days exploring the city, just taking photos. And the one idea I had in my head was like, okay, how do I capture things that are not going to exist in a few years or even 10 years or so? And a lot of my photos, you can't capture them anymore because Toronto is growing so fast as a metropolitan city. So the skyline has completely changed. There's new buildings, some buildings are gone. And I'm very grateful that I was able to capture a certain point in time with my photos. And if you think about it, that's honestly the root of photography. You're capturing one frame that will only exist in that one frame of time. And I was just doing it on a grander scale. It's our city. And then how did it happen? All of it, I guess, is like, I was just posting on Instagram, and then I started gaining a lot of followers very quickly. And that led to opportunities like working with 500px, which is a Toronto photography company, particularly for licensing. And I would host photo walks with them. They would feature me. I would do workshops, so a lot of fun stuff. To my understanding, whenever they had clients that came to them for licensing, they would include my photos in whatever batch they're pitching. One of the clients was Google, and to this day, every single Google device has my photo as a wallpaper, which is absolutely incredible. And I guess it happened when I turned 20, so yeah, it's been 8 years since then, which is absurd to think about. And then Uber CEO, again, I make it very known that I'm a photographer wherever I'm working. And then after I completed my internship, they would keep calling me back for photography opportunities. And in 100% honesty, like, I was not a skilled photographer for portraits or like anything like that. I didn't even have the right equipment, but they hired me and they took a chance on me. So there was one day where it was just me and the Uber CEO just hanging out like all day, and I get to take photos of him, and it was really fun. It was a great opportunity.
And then how did you go from that to, I guess, music photography?
Yeah, shortly after COVID, I just kind of realized I don't really enjoy cityscapes and architecture anymore, or at least not in the sense that I used to. And I realized I was doing it more for Instagram, and actually there's a real reason. I remember photography was dying for me because of COVID. Like, I'm not leaving my house, obviously, but I did a trip around Europe, and I met this dude whose grandpa or dad was a famous photographer. I met this dude whose dad was a famous photographer, and I showed him my photos. He's like, look, man, you clearly have a great eye for this, but your photos have no life in them. And that really resonated with me because it's something I agree with. Like, whenever I looked at my photos, I'm like, this is just, yeah, it's a cool building, but so what, right? I know that kind of contradicts with my original saying of why I was seeing my photos. But I realized the number one thing is, like, okay, when anyone is showing their photos to their kids or nieces or whatever, they're not gonna be looking at photos of buildings or pretty landscapes. They're gonna be looking at photos of people. They're gonna ask you, oh, who's that person? Oh, that's probably your uncle, da da da. So I focus on taking photos of more people, and then I guess concert photography specifically is as a completely different crap. I'm like way off track. Trying to tie it back. Yeah, now I take photos of people and videos, and then once I got a little better at that, I realized, okay, how can I combine another one of my interests with photography?
I'll offer up a follow-up question to help smooth things along. What's like the difference in perspectives for you when it comes to photographing inanimate objects such as like cities, cityscapes, etc.
Yeah.
Versus people that are moving a lot faster than the city does in concerts, in person?
It's funny because all of this actually ties back to design engineering. You really have to slow down and pause and think. You can't just hold down your shutter and pray for the right shot, but you actually have to pay attention and make sure you get the angle that is probably going to exist for a millisecond and get it at the right shutter speed, get it at the right ISO and all that lighting and all that fun stuff. You're paying attention to a lot more elements than just looking at a building, which makes things a lot more exciting. And I guess I can talk about concert photography more in particular is that you're in the front row of the pit. It's just you and other photographers, and the crowd is cheering behind you and then the artist in front of you. It's a very unreal, surreal experience where it's just like, wow, this is like, I can't even believe I get to do this as my job.
So just for the concert experience, I'm curious, like what was your favorite one? Like when is it that you were like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here right now?
Honestly, it's every single one of them. Because it's like, these are artists you listen to, and then you're like so close to them. But I guess the ones I can think of where I'm like, I left like in awe was Maggie Rogers. She was great. Daniel Caesar. It was my first time shooting in an arena. So the Scotiabank Arena. And it's just like, there's like, I don't know, like 500,000 people there. And it's just like you're this close to the artist and you're just taking photos. It's a very unreal kind of experience. And I was very glad to be there. And then there's one more where it's like, I guess there's a few times where I got to meet the artist. And one time I remember, I think I've been thinking about this one a lot recently. Like, his name is Bryce Vine, but he was wearing a t-shirt of Outkast. And I asked him, I'm like, yo, what's your favorite Outkast song? And then we started kind of rapping it together. And I'm just like, wait, this is a kind of a cool experience that I look back on it. Like, yeah, Bryce Vine is not a megastar, but it's like some guy I did listen to. So it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think even if he's not a megastar, like some of these people, like the personalities that it takes to become that kind of a character for people, I think it's just a unique experience anyway.
Yeah,
I would imagine. And Maggie Rogers is sick. I love Maggie Rogers.
She was incredible. It was funny because she has a song, I can't remember the name, but it's like When the Rain Comes or something. And after she played it, it started raining. So it was like, wow, this is cool.
What's your dream artist to be able to take photos of at a concert?
It's Dominic Fike. Unfortunately, he doesn't allow media people because he has his own photographer, and I think he gets nervous and stuff. So he's very strict about who's in the pit. I did get to shoot, one of the first shows was actually Dominic Fike's openers. And I was like, okay, maybe I can sneak in, but no, they kicked me out. This is important, but I left out so I started photography and programming at the same time. The big reason I got into building websites or design engineering is because one, wanted my website to look nice, and two, I was a student. I couldn't afford $20, $30 a month USD to host a website. So I started learning how to code just so I can build my photography portfolio online. And that's kind of like the root of it. Every 6 months or so, I would just keep building my photography website over and over again just to make it perfect to my understanding. And that's kind of the biggest turning point of how I learned how to code.
Well, one thing I did find like parallels in between photography and engineering, software engineering for you was this idea of like continuous improvement, about how whenever you reach the point where you were held back because of your current skill set, whether it be engineering or photography, you sort of had to force yourself to learn more and push past your limits in a certain way to be able to excel and get to where you want to be. Right now, what areas would you say are like the things that you're trying to learn currently, things you're focusing on? And especially now that given you're a design engineer at a very prominent company, how are you staying updated in such a rapidly evolving field where there's new tools all the time that can potentially do some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there will be a point where AI tools will be able to be super creative. And I think there will be always be a need for that. So with that is like, how do I keep my creative brain fresh? How do I stay creative? Is I've actually been transitioning into making videos and more film. I want to learn how to be a great storyteller, and I just want to document a lot more. So recently I took a trip to Argentina, and I recorded a lot of short clips. Like I'm not a good filmmaker. I realize it's very different from photography. But like what I did was like, okay, if I'm going to take a photo, it's like just take a video instead. So I have like probably 200 clips that I'm going to put together. It's like, okay, how do I use all this footage to craft a story and sound design and music and all that fun stuff, and then put it out there in the world, and then eventually keep getting better and learn more about film.
That's really cool. Yeah. Just the fact that even the barrels exist and you're able to grow on both spaces or like dimensions, I guess is pretty cool by itself. But you're talking about like cities earlier, about cityscapes in your photography, and how like you kind of got over shooting city landscapes and things like that. Do you think some of that was just the fact that you got bored of Toronto as like the subject of those photographs, or do you think that it was just like the nature of the photography in that case?
I think it's a mix of both. But yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, Toronto, I used to say like, oh, I know the city like the back of my hand, because like I felt like I explored every single corner of it, especially in my photography peak. And then what I would do is like I would travel to different cities that are big metropolitans. So Chicago, New York, Montreal were the first cities I ever traveled to without my parents, and took a bunch of photos there. But eventually it just reached a point where I'm just like, this is not it anymore, and I can't keep traveling to take new photos. And then also the people that I was looking up to a lot, they kind of stopped too. They moved on to different things. A lot of us weren't actually doing this for the fact that a lot of us were only doing this because of the sake of doing it for maybe Instagram or something like that, but not necessarily because these photos were meaningful or even actually monetizable, because Instagram reached a point where it was like, well, no media agency is going to start buying these photos or like going to pay for ads through these kind of accounts, because you want more of a human touch. So it's like, okay, how do you include more humans in your photos?
Okay, just out of the cities that you traveled to, which one was like your favorite experience at personally enjoyable, and then like photography wise, like you said, New York, Chicago, Montreal, those.
Personally enjoyable, I think it's because I've been so many times with New York.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's one of the greatest cities in the world.
Agreed.
I mean, Montreal is also great, but all those cities are
No
great.
shade on any city, but New York
Anyways,
is just New York, you know?
But yeah, travel, it's very hard for me to speak on just pick one item when traveling, because there's always something unique about each of them. Like Chicago was the first ever city I went to. Well, I guess Montreal, I don't count that, but Chicago with my friends, and we went in the winter. Like I had a rule, it's like after every single internship I would go and take a trip. So I finished the internship, went to Chicago with my friends, and it was actually -40 with wind chill.
Yeah.
And me and my friend Matt, who's actually a famous Instagram influencer now, and we woke up at like 5 a.m., probably earlier, and we took an Uber to a Lyft. I remember we're like,
yeah, Chicago.
Yeah, but we're like broke students, right? So we signed up for a Lyft account. This is when it was not in Toronto. So we got the free credits, and that's what we used to get to the pier. And we took the most beautiful sunrise photos there. It was very cold, and that was a very memorable time. And it was also one of the first times I met someone outside my country. I went to go meet someone from Instagram in real life, and I think his name was Neil Kumar, and he's a doctor, and he showed us around the city and showed us these cool spots, and he got us on top of an exclusive building, and it was really fun. Yeah.
That's really cool. But Chicago in the winter is a pain.
There's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad attire. And especially when you're young.
And a bad attitude, maybe.
Yeah.
I can attest to that sometimes.
But when you're like, I don't know, I was probably like 20, probably 19. It's just like, I want to take photos. That's all you care about.
Yeah.
So like you spend all day outside just taking photos. And I try to bring it out sometimes, but I'm just like, fuck, it's cold.
That's really cool. Okay, but like now bringing it back a little bit to something you mentioned a while back, you were talking about the fact that the people you were looking up to at that point, like maybe for photography, you were saying moved on to other things, and that kind of had an impact on you as well. And somebody I've spoken to who's been in like the corporate space in Toronto for like 20 years now, I was talking to them the other day, and he mentioned that he used to be a software engineer and then left that job because the exemplars he had in front of them, he saw such a big divide between himself and them that he felt that he could never achieve that, and he chose to pivot out of software engineering. But if you have had an experience like this where you think like how important is an exemplar in your early career stages, and whether for you personally that would be a motivating factor or demotivating to see that kind of, just chasm between yourself and somebody else's abilities.
That's interesting. No, I've always seen it like I want to be like them. I want to be better than them. And then I knew I was getting good as a photographer is when they started following me on Instagram. And I know, like, we shouldn't treat that as validation. But again, this is 2016. Like, it's completely different. And that's when I realized, okay, like, yes, the gap is getting a lot more smaller. But I think, like, to say in short, the biggest thing we all realized was, like, there's no money in this. And we can't keep doing this forever. So a lot of people moved on to different kinds of photography.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. And I think like just goes to show how much that space has changed today and from where you were. Do you think there was a possibility that could have been like a career path if like you were doing that today?
Photography?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Like, so I was making good money. I was getting paid to travel. Like it was 100% a possible career path. But I just realized the things I was getting paid to photograph were not exciting. Like once your hobby turns into a job, it's no longer a hobby, and that's where things get blurry. So I remember the last paid thing I did was like I got paid to fly to Victoria, Vancouver, just take photos of a hotel. And I'm just like, I don't ever want to do this. And that's kind of when I stopped posting on Instagram, and then I did post for 4 years actually, and then that's it.
So you mentioned that you met somebody off of Instagram for the first time and how that was like a pivot point in your life. How did that, bringing this back to like Toronto now, how did that sort of impact the community that you're a part of today? The community that you're a part of in like the Toronto tech space? Because a lot of this stuff that happens on Twitter, there's a lot of individuals that are very influential. Was there ever a point where you met them through Twitter or like through Futureland, for example? How did your past experiences make you more open to getting to know these people more, building your relationships with them?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was younger, I was also like, I guess confused. Maybe it's just like all my closest friends were friends I made through Instagram. So and like I went to like had friends from university, on high school, but it pretty much all just faded away because there's no, you're only friends because you're stuck in a room together for like 8 hours a day. Like there's no. Maybe sometimes there is, but there has to be a mutual interest for you to.
Yeah, I think that's like such a valid point.
Yeah.
Because especially when you're in university, these situational friendships are so common.
Yeah.
And it's just extremely interesting to me how you sort of overcome that point where you've had maintained certain friendships that you created maybe at university or past university, and how they're still really strong and well maintained today.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I guess, to add on is like, a lot of those friends that I met through Instagram, like we all moved off of photography, we're doing different things, but I know I can count on them. Like I can literally text them right now and ask for a favor and they will be there for me in comparison to some of the friends I made in university. And I went to a commuter school, so pretty much everyone went to class and left. So things were weird. Versus I would stay and like me and my photography friends would all just hang out and take photos all day. Like obviously we're going to bond a lot more. And then I guess, that graduates to the Twitter and all that fun stuff. Now it's like, I'm not worried about meeting a bunch of people on Twitter. I already did this with Instagram and like a whole different life before. So, and I know the value of this. It's like we all like tech, we all like building software. Let's get together.
So, what importance do you place like on the people that you surround yourself with for the things that you're doing now? So you mentioned photography. You were surrounded by people who were also photographers, and it seems like that impacted you quite a lot on like your perspective when it comes to photography. How does that translate to the people you're surrounding yourself with currently?
Yeah, I guess it's like I don't ever want to put people in a box. Like people are not one-dimensional. They're not just photographers. They're not just tech people or whatnot. But I think the more common trait is that they're driven. They're all go-getters. I guess it ties back to that Casey Neistat video. It's like doing what you can. Like if you surround yourself with a bunch of people who are chasing what's kind of the impossible, like obviously you're going to be motivated to do the impossible as well. I think I can use a very realistic and simple example of this. Is like I grew up in a low income neighborhood, and in grade 9 my grade average was about 50%. Like I was not going to go to university. Like it was not going to happen. My parents moved to Markham, and I ended up at one of the smartest schools in probably the district or the city. And again, everyone there, like super smart, honor roll student. And when you're surrounded by these people, it's like you have no other option. Like I'm gonna have to focus on my studies because everyone else around me is doing that. And then I graduated with honors. Completely different life path from the people I grew up with, simply because I just lived in a different neighborhood.
I think your environment and the impact that has your intrinsic motivation is kind of insane sometimes.
Yeah.
Over the summer when I was working, I would be obsessed with going into work every day because when I was at home, I felt like I was not motivated or I didn't feel like I had a community pushing me to do something.
Exactly.
So I think that's one area where I've seen the Toronto tech space or whatever I know about it adjacently through Rudy is like, oh, this is kind of cool. Just the momentum that it gives you just by being involved in it is kind of a cool thing. And your experience sounds like that as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about your future aspirations now. Do you have any upcoming projects or goals that you're excited about that you want to share with other people?
I haven't said this one out loud yet, but last year I wanted to launch 6 projects. I think I launched 3.5, but I think this year I could do it. I could do 6 projects. I already have 3 in the works that are near completion. The next one is going to launch soon. It's called Bloom. It's a calendar journaling app. It's just for fun, for me to become a better engineer, but also push myself as a designer and understand all aspects of building a product. And honestly, for no big reason other than just to learn. That's kind of how I've always been. And then the second goal or like thing I want to work on is videos. So even when I went to Argentina, I recorded a daily video of just like my trip, but just like a talking head video. And honestly, it was no reason other than for the sake of getting comfortable and building the discipline of uploading a video every day, but being in front of a camera and stuff like that. And now, since I already feel comfortable in uploading on YouTube, that will continue and scale as I figure out how to edit these videos that I have.
So it appears that the video stuff is personal creative endeavors.
Yes.
The projects that you mentioned, are any of those related to your professional career, or is it all just to maintain your current creative mind space?
I think a mix of both. It's important to note, like, I've always been building side projects since high school. It's just what I like doing. I'm very grateful that my job is what I would be doing in my free time anyways. I no longer have to look for a job. I'm very happy with where I am, and I don't have to build projects for the sake of finding potential employers. So I have a lot more flexibility and more room to be creative with my projects, to take my time. And it's personally only for me and no other external validation.
I suppose you can take a bit more like liberty with your projects.
Like there's no rush to get them out because I'm just doing it for myself.
I do want to point out something. You said that for your job, you're doing something now that you'd be doing anyways.
Yeah.
But then prior to this, you mentioned that when your hobby becomes your job, it's not a good thing. Why the contrast between these things?
Yeah, it's still a job because I remember getting my first developer job and I'm like, oh, this is the most exciting thing in the world. But at the end of the day, you're locked in for 8 hours a day. And it's like, you don't have the flexibility. I mean, you do have the flexibility, but you don't have the complete flexibility to decide it's like, oh, I don't want to work on this today. Or if you want to context switch, it's very difficult. You have to finish this one particular task that you're limited to. Or maybe your code base is a particular way. So I had to write code in this thing called ClojureScript, which I absolutely hated, but that's what I had to write code in. You don't get that grounds to explore as much as you can, but also you get to build these beautiful UIs and tailwinds. So I'm just flowing, like I'm just having the time of my life, but you get stuck. It's like, okay, we're using ClojureScript. I can't use React components as much as I like to, but it's just, I guess there's trade-offs, but you have to recognize at the end of the day, it's a job. I think that distinction is very important.
That's really cool. Well, getting towards now our final segment of this conversation, which is something that we're planning to like introduce with all of our guests. So I'm going to ask you like, let's say 10 rapid fire questions. So you don't have to go in too much depth about this.
Yeah.
They can be surface level answers. We're just curious what your instant responses, right? Some of them are catered towards you, of course. Some of them are generic questions that I'm just curious about.
Yeah.
So say you've had a really long day of work. What is your go-to comfort meal after that?
Meal.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry, this is rapid fire, but I have to think.
We'll cut away the time that you're wasting thinking about it. So
I know, we're keeping all this.
No, it's funny. I would actually, if I had a really stressful day at work, actually unwind by cooking. And usually What I'm best at is Indian curry. And I think the one I make most commonly is a coconut chickpea curry.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I remember one time when the three of us were at dinner and you talked about making Indian food a lot, and Rudy and I were just a little embarrassed by the fact that we're too lazy to ever give it too much of a go. It's really cool they're doing it. You gotta cook for us sometime.
I will.
Okay, next question. Would you rather spend an entire day coding stuck in a cabin in the woods or shooting photos in a city?
I'm sorry, photography, but I code in cabin in the woods.
Oh,
Easy.
interesting. I really thought you were gonna go more hobby there, but this is pretty cool. Okay, I feel like I might know a couple of good candidates for this answer because of previous conversation with you, but what is the most random thing you've ever built just for fun?
Built.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a coding project, just anything you built.
But it could still be a coding project,
yeah,
just because we know you do that.
Random thing I've built. I wanted to see how much green onions I could grow. And turns out it's actually easy. You just put them in water. And yes, I had a bunch of green onion on my windowsill for a few months.
Oh.
And then that's when I realized the importance of globalization and
Free trade.
because like you can get a lot more a lot faster than
That's
growing them
true.
yourself.
Wow, quick little detour as a botanist. I would not have guessed. That is pretty cool. What is your guilty pleasure gadget or device or one thing that you just feel like you should really be able to live without, but you can't? Or it could just be an
Device.
app as well, like a specific app or.
Twitter?
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. It says joined 2009. So it's like I've had it since I was 12 years old, which is insane.
That's crazy.
And like I've been checking it daily since I was 12 years old.
Well, it's part of your daily routine, you know. If it gets you
Yeah.
going, it gets you going. Do you have like an idol or somebody that you could invite as the ideal dinner guest? Would it be, like a designer, engineer, photographer, dead or alive? Who would you like to have dinner with, one-on-one?
It's funny. This changes a lot depending on where I'm in my life or like what my biggest interest is. Like, if you asked me like 7 years ago or whatever, it would probably have been J. Cole or some photographer I look up to. I don't think I would ever invite a software engineer or design engineer. Like, I'll be honest. I don't know anything about this guy. His name's Anthony Bourdain. I think he's interesting. The things I've read about him, and I want to learn a lot more. I should probably watch his videos and read his books, but so far, I think I would pick him.
I think you could have like a long time just reading up on it,
Yeah,
watching some of his shows.
Yeah, but I think like I'm into travel, I'm into cooking, and I think he was also into video, so I think it would be a great way to learn very quickly.
What is one app or tool that you think is totally underrated?
Wait, no, sorry. Also, Anthony Bourdain thinks Toronto is a bad city, and I just want to prove it wrong. Sorry, what was it? One is app, one.
It's going back to doing things you can't do. That's interesting. But yeah, sorry. The question was, what is one app or tool that you think is totally underrated?
Underrated. One app or tool. There was this app. I mean, it's still around. I just don't use it as much. I guess voice recordings. I started doing them a lot when I was traveling last year on this app called Spacebar. But I realized it's just like you're kind of like organizing your thoughts when you're speaking, and then the more you do it, you learn your patterns, whether it's in speech or how you think, and like you learn how to improve from that. And then also when I went to Argentina, when I was recording my daily videos, I'm like, oh, wow, like I didn't realize this about myself until I said it out loud. I think that is extremely valuable.
Oh, that's pretty insightful answer. What is a design trend that you secretly either love or hate? And it also comes with the assumption that it's no longer going to be secret, of course, as you put it out there. But
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a traditional design background. I don't even know anything about trends or anything like that, to be honest. I guess I'm very selfish. It's just like I want to make things look how I like them to look.
Okay.
It's funny, I showed my project to my friend recently. He's like, oh, you're too much of a software engineer. You need more rounded borders and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I don't. I like making things the way I like them to look. So I'm not really yet focused on trends.
I'm the design engineer.
Hey, that's fair enough, Okay, this is a good one, I think. If you could swap jobs with somebody for one day, who would that person be? And this is a direct swap, so like responsibilities, working hours, everything.
Yeah, I think I don't want a job on the computer Can I give two answers?
Yeah, sure.
So one, I always say to others is like, in a past life, I would have been an architect. I really want to learn how to build buildings or just like the process that goes behind it. And then I guess the other answer, this one I'll probably get flamed for, but it's just like, I don't know, maybe a bartender or something like that.
Tough job.
Yeah, exactly. Or a waiter. And it's funny because when I was in high school, like I would try to get those kind of jobs, but no, I didn't know how. Or like no one would hire me, and it was just really frustrating. But I wish I got that experience.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like the thing you said about the architecture part. One of my closest friends is studying to be an architect. I think he has probably the best taste I know out of anybody.
Yeah.
And just his perspective on things and how I've seen it evolve just because of his architectural education is kind of cool. I think
Yeah.
the way your domain of existence affects how you the world is
Yeah.
kind of a cool evolution.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. But next question. What is a totally useless skill that you're really good at? And you can take liberties with this because totally useless to you might not be the same for someone else.
To think about these.
Sorry. Yeah. Some of them are thoughtful rapid fire
I
questions.
mean, I'm
you
sure
know,
I have. I don't have an answer.
all your skills are super useful.
No.
That's what I'm getting from this. This is what I'm getting.
Definitely has useless skills.
Okay. If your life up to this point had been a movie, right? What would the title be?
Mitul Shah's Day Off.
Oh, okay. Very Ferris Bueller, but we'll go with it. What would be a dream location for a photograph shoot?
I feel like somewhere in the Dolomites. I've just never been a nature photographer. It's never worked for me. Like I'm very bad at it. But if I had time and the right equipment, I think it would be really fun to do that. Yeah.
That's pretty good. And this one's just for me, but I think the people are dying to know. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
What?
I think it's influenced by my travel. Like I've never been an animal person, but I went to Turkey, Morocco, and Bosnia as well, and I just met so many cats. I'm like, now I'm obsessed with them.
That's pretty cool. I'm allergic to dogs, and I would pick dogs. Not that anybody asked, but I'm just saying. And then, apples or oranges?
That's 11 questions now.
Yeah, I know. This is just a spare. backup.
Probably oranges. Apples can be bitter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but they're, orange juice tastes good.
Okay.
Natural orange juice tastes good.
I think at this point we know you really well, especially the food taste part right at the end. That was a super important question that's gonna stay in. But any questions from you, Rudy?
Thank you for being the first ever guest of Not a Minimum Viable podcast.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Great chatting. Thanks, Mitul.
Yeah. Do you have before we quickly end this, do you have anything you'd like to say to anybody who's listening?
Do what you can. That's it.
Oh, great message.
Pretty cool. Right on theme. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Do we applaud?
Cue the music.
Awesome.